Good afternoon. Today we're here talking to Leanne Sumner, just sharing a bit about parts of her story with us. Hi Leanne.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So who are you and where are you from?
So I'm Leanne Sumner. I'm a proud Gunditjmara woman. So I'm from the Western Districts of Victoria. I grew up at a little farm in Princetown, which is near Port Campbell, but my family's from Framlingham, which is an Aboriginal reserve.
So is there any of your family involved in the stolen generations, and if so, how did that impact on your family?
Look, I've really come to understand how much stolen generation has impacted on my family just in the last few years. And I guess a lot of it's been assumptions from what's happened, but sadly my nana had a child that she had from birth through till he was about 9, and my Aunty Maisie told me about the time the police came, and it used to be quite a common thing on the Framlingham Reserve that the police would come and take the kids that were a bit lighter in colouring. And my uncle was about 9 when he was taken from my family. My Aunty Maisie just said, you know, the kids were screaming, you know, absolutely screaming, and the elders would be saying, you know, you've got to run to the bush, you've got to hide. And, you know, he was only young and he thought that it was like hide and seek. And so she said that she's never gotten over it because she felt responsible. You know, she was older and she felt that she should have saved him and protected him. And she told me about, excuse me if I start to cry, because it's really hard to think about someone that you love and care about. It's really hard to think about those memories. And so Marnie Maisie was saying that my nana, you know, was begging the police, absolutely begging the police, could she please get some food together for my uncle so that he could take the food with him. And she said about how my nana was running behind the car, and yeah, it's hard to think about the impact on my nana. And I think in a lot of ways that's impacted a lot of our lives, that a lot of the memories are just so painful that they couldn't talk about them. And so lots of things that I found were repercussions of that. You know, my Aunty Maisie, you know, my nana never got to see, you know, her son again. He actually came his son actually came many years later trying to find my nana, but by then she'd married again and he couldn't find her because she was under a different name. But, you know, my cousin's now part of our family and we get to see him, and I think it was one of the proudest moments of my life was when my Aunty Maisie actually died, that he was asked to do the readings at her funeral. And, you know, it was kind of like full circle. It was kind of like, you know, he's now part of us. And the thing I found really amazing about it was that even though he'd not been a part of the Aboriginal community for like 30 years, when he found out about, you know, who he was and where he came from, that he was exactly like us. Exactly like us. And it made me think a lot about things that happened in our family that we didn't realise. And one of the things that was really significant to me was our own immediate family had expanded, and I remember my sister saying to my mum, we need to get some more cups, because my mum only had her, you know, 4 or 5 cups and that was it. Because I realised the repercussion of having someone stolen from your family was you spent the rest of your life worrying about, were you going to be stolen, or were your kids going to be stolen from you? So my mum would have to have the house immaculate. Everything would have to be absolutely perfect. So you could only have X amount of plates and X amount of cups and X amount of glasses, because you'd have to keep those clean. You'd have to have everything just spotless, you know, because if, you know, the police came again and took you, you could say, well, my house is immaculate. I've got plenty of food in the cupboard. You know, that was a big obsession. And I realised why, you know, having a brother that was taken from them really impacted on them.
So is any of your family involved in native title?
Yes, so my family grew up at Framlingham. So of course Framlingham went through with Malcolm Fraser and getting the rights for identifying it as an Aboriginal, land and Aboriginal property. But of course the government, its wisdom, decided to take away Framlingham, and it's been a long drawn out battle, and so the property that my great grandfather was on, that's gone. So it's really sad to think that that's where my grandmother, my nana, grew up, and my mum lived, and that's all gone. That's all gone from the wisdom of the government.
So what do you think are some of the major issues that Aboriginal people face today?
I think the biggest issue is respect. I worked as an Aboriginal hospital liaison at Monash Health for a decade, and for me, that was the one thing that people said to me was the lack of respect. If people identify you as being Aboriginal, they immediately feel like they've lost that respect from that person, that people have so much judgment about the word Aboriginal, from whether it's, is that person Aboriginal or not, or, what is that person getting out of being Aboriginal, or for an Aboriginal person questioning whether that person's Aboriginal or not. I just think there's so much judgment and so much lack of respect if you identify or if you don't identify, or, the tall poppy syndrome of, I'm not going to knock you down because you might get more than me, or, I think we've just got to get back to that traditional way of, leading our culture and supporting each other and building each other up. And so I think for me it's been really interesting to look at, Aboriginality as a concept, and the judgment about whether you're not white, you're not dark enough, you're too white. I just think it's crazy. Like, if you go to Italy and you look at how many other nationalities have come into Italian culture and Italian people, no one ever judges if there's an Italian person who's got Asian features. So why is this huge problem about an Aboriginal person who has lighter colour skin, or has a different nationality type look? Why do we have to justify ourselves all the time? Why do we have to explain ourselves? When you think about the kind of criticism and media perception of what an Aboriginal person is, for a person to say that they are, obviously they are. So I just think people need to think more about how hard it is for an Aboriginal person to identify and what they're going to go through by identifying. And I found it really interesting with, we're going through the treaty at the moment. And so speaking to some of the community members at the discussions about the treaty, I found it really fascinating that, the perception in the media was about, people want the treaty for money and they want the treaty for, gaining something themselves. And the number one thing that came up was about culture. There's so many Aboriginal people who are so desperate to learn more about their culture, to share their culture, to participate in culture. And I think it's so sad that, it's been portrayed in the media as being about, money, when actually, it's a person's right to be able to participate in their culture and learn about their culture.
So how do you define Aboriginality and what makes a person Aboriginal?
So to me, it's about your soul and your gut feeling, and it's about the way you're brought up. So I think for me, I really challenged my identity for a long time. And I was really, really lucky that an elder in our community, Uncle Banjo Clark, one day we were down the street and I was with my mum, and he said to me, "Oh, come here, Curry girl." And I'm like, "Uncle, look at me." And he said to me, "Sister girl, your mum's Aboriginal, your aunties and uncles are Aboriginal, your grandparents are Aboriginal, you're part of the Aboriginal community here, you're Aboriginal. It doesn't matter what colour your skin is." He said, it's like a cup of coffee, You can add milk to that cup of coffee, but it's still a cup of coffee. You still taste the coffee. The coffee's strong and your Aboriginal blood is strong. And he said, you're Aboriginal. And so from that moment on, I just thought, if someone that's so respected and so knowledgeable and someone that I had so much respect for considered me as Aboriginal, then I'm honoured to be Aboriginal.
So there's a lot of people finding out there about their Aboriginality later in life. What advice would you give them to help them to start to find out about their Aboriginality?
Oh, look, I think it's really important. We've got IATS here, and it's a central database for Aboriginal records. I found it really phenomenal being able to get the research that they've gathered. I got some amazing photos of my family through searching their database. You can do a registered search with them and they'll find it all and collate it and send it to you. So I think that's a really great starting point. I think also there's some really incredible Facebook pages. So for example, with Gunditjmara, which is where I'm from, there's about 3 or 4 registered Gunditjmara Facebook pages. And so by getting on those pages and talking to other Gunditjmara people and sharing the family histories that you've got, so I think if you go on those pages and you start to learn about people's stories and, what our culture is about, and, we're really proud of who we've come from and what we are, we're the fighting Gunditjmara. So, that's great being able to pass that down and, for other people to share and learn from that knowledge. I think it's a great way to really connect with your culture.
So what advice would you give young Aboriginal adolescents who would like to find out more about their Aboriginality?
Look, I think there's some incredible youth programs. I look at the local ones around, where I am, and some of the people, the youth workers, they're just unbelievable. It's great experiences and it's all about culture and all about learning and sharing and, caring about each other. And I think it's a really great supportive cultural experience to be involved in. And, you're going to meet a lot of other people who don't have much culture either and others that do. So I think it's a really good opportunity to get to learn more about your culture and connect to your community.
So what advice would you give non-Indigenous people who want to find out more about Indigenous cultures? Where should they start?
Look, I think there's some really fantastic, Aboriginal tours. So if you go into the Career Heritage Trust, if you go into any of the gathering places, if you go into the museum, there's some amazing Aboriginal tour guides. If you go on the garden walks, there's some really incredible experiences where you get to meet with Aboriginal people and learn from them and understand about them. I think you can also look at doing mentoring. I found it really valuable for the Aboriginal person being able to share their culture and for the non-Aboriginal person being able to share their work skills with Aboriginal, youth. And I think it's a great two-way street. And I think, we all should be learning from each other and sharing from each other and caring about each other. We're all, one human race, really.
So what's one stereotype you would like to break about Aboriginal people?
Oh, we're all drunks. I think it's a bit of a joke. I'm well known at parties that, where's my cup of tea? So I think if you actually look at the statistics on the Australian Bureau of Statistics, Aboriginal people don't drink as much as other nationalities. But I think the ones that do, it's probably more obvious. So I think also a lot of community, my grandfather was an alcoholic, so my mum found it very difficult being around people who drink.
So for part of closing the gap, there is something about increasing Indigenous employment. What do you find are the most predominant issues with Indigenous employment in Australia?
Look, I just think people don't look at the common sense. So if you look at it, if you're, for me, I've been doing a lot in Aboriginal employment the last few years. So let's look at it from the start. If you've come from a family that's never worked, you don't know how to fill out superannuation forms. You don't know how to apply for jobs. You don't know how to go for an interview. You don't know how to present yourself in the workplace. So for me, I've been supporting Aboriginal people into employment. So it's things like they don't even know how to use a Myki card. They don't have the funds to be able to, buy a Myki card or buy a car or buy, clothes to be able to go to work. So, it's just that common sense of going, there's so many complexities before you even start a job, before you even apply for a job. And if you're overwhelmed with all of that, it's very hard to then have the stability and follow through with employment. It's also the judgment, employing a lot of Aboriginal people recently. One of the things they've said is we're scared of how we're going to be judged when we're in that workplace. We're scared about how other people are going to say it's tokenistic and we've just been given the job, and so they always feel like they're going to be judged, or they're not good enough, or they're not doing enough, or there's just so many barriers. And not having family members that can support them through that because they've been through it themselves just make it even harder.
So how do you find an elder in community?
I think an elder is elected by community. I think it's about the community saying to you, you've done the Aboriginal way of things, you've supported the community, and so they, acknowledge that with you by calling you auntie. And so I don't believe that suddenly you turn 50 and you're an elder. I believe it's about the community deciding that you've done what they feel is beneficial to the community, and so they, acknowledge that by calling you an elder, calling you auntie. One of the things I'd really love to share is, my understanding of Aboriginal knowledge. And I just think we're really missing a trick in this country. The Aboriginal people that I've grown up with, they are so incredibly smart. And they have what I call a multi-dimensional, understanding about life and about the way things work in life. So I think the thing that really made me realise this was my mum was in hospital at one point, and we were in St Vincent's Hospital, really busy, very noisy, very overwhelming, experience. And my mum said to me, my doctor's coming. And I said, does your doctor normally come at this time, Mum? And she said, no. And I said, how do you know? And she said, I know by the sound of his footsteps. And I thought, oh my goodness. And then I thought about other things with my mum, and I thought a lot of the Aboriginal people I know, like my mum, they have this multi-dimensional way of looking at life. They absorb not just the sounds and the smells and the way people talk. In Gunditjmara culture, we have what we call silent listening. Most people I know, they talk just to have a chance to talk back. Whereas with a lot of the Gunditjmara elders, they'll talk and then there'll be this time of quiet. And they're totally comfortable in that, where they're processing what you're saying and they're understanding what you're saying. And it's not just about what I can say, it's about learning from each other and understanding from each other. And I think we need to do more of that we need to really understand each other and truly listen to each other and have conversations to learn from each other. And I kind of think those things about looking at things in a different way, Aboriginal people can add so much more value to a lot of things because of those skills and abilities that they've got. I think even just the fundamentals of Aboriginal traditions, society could learn so much more.
So from your story, what would you like people to take away from hearing you?
Look, I'd love to think that people go, Aboriginal people aren't so scary, and they come in all shapes and sizes and colours, and, don't judge us by what you think we should be or what you expect that we should be. We're friendly, we don't bite, we're, nice people. So take the opportunity to come and talk to us. I'd love to come and talk to you. I don't mind a chat.
So we just want to say thanks for Leanne for talking to us today, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you, AJ.